Hey guys, welcome back to Hollywood Mechanic. Today we're talking about none other than the PTU yet again. Seems like that's a majority of what I'm doing these days. This is a fault that is actually not a result of Ferrari. This is a user error. I've had a couple of gearbox or PTUs sent in that someone else rebuilt, and we all make mistakes, you know, but I'm shocked at how many gearboxes, like both dual clutch and PTUs, are coming back with just really elementary faults. So if you have had your PTU rebuilt, someone bought my kit and then they installed it at another dealer, and then maybe 6-8 months later you start to lose your reverse gear for the PTU. So when you drive in forward gears, everything works fine, but if you put it in reverse, then you get the 4x4 fault. Now the reason for that is this bearing right here. This bearing is an angular contact bearing. You can see how all the contact on the inside of the race is on that side. That fits in here, and then this fits into this outer race like this, okay? And you can see a little bit of cloudiness on that outer race, on that outer edge where the balls roll. That requires a very specific preload. The preload on the bearing itself, I believe, is 114 newton meters, something like that. You can look it up. It's a FAG bearing, I believe, if I remember correctly. XL, so X-Life, yeah, FAG. It's available. You can buy it. It's not too cheap, but it's on the pinion. So we're gonna look right here. This is the pinion, basically. It's not driven directly from the crank. It's driven still through gears, but this drives the ring gear, which is what engages the clutches and the axles, okay? On the back side of this, there are two angular contact bearings, one very large one and one very small one. So the large one is, you can see right through that crack there, barely. I'm not gonna be able to really see it. There, you can see it like the edge of the race sticking up over that aluminum there. And then on this side here, you have the other one, which is like this. And the nut, there's two nuts that lock these into place and hold the right preload. Now I said 114 newton meters. That does not mean you put 114 newton meters on the nut. See, when you tighten the nut, it's a lever and it's moving, and there's a specific equation to how much you tighten based on the thread pitch and the size of the inner diameter of the thread on the nut. And we're not going to worry about that. We don't need to calculate all that, because if you watch my video, you would see that you should mark on the shaft and on the nut exactly where it was when you took it apart. Now I have to admit, I made this mistake myself very early on, and I was shown how to remove this bolt by another technician, and no excuse. I should have known you can't just give it to him to impact off and impact back on and be like, same amount of UGAs to get it on as it came to get it off. It doesn't work like that, because most importantly, they use, of course, our favorite Loctite, the green permanent Loctite on these threads so they don't back out. Now that should be a clue. It has a double nut on there. I'll go ahead and show you what that looks like. Here's another one. You can see two nuts there, and so they're locking together, and on top of that, this green thin Loctite that's basically forever glue. That means that there's not a lot of torque on that bolt. Now what I've seen from doing them is it's about 35 to 40 newton meters of torque on that nut, and then the lock nut usually goes at 80. Doesn't matter, you're not moving the lock, as long as you're only turning the lock nut, you're not increasing the load or the torque on that second nut. So have at it. But if you over torque that bolt, if you just hammer it on, then it will grenade that bearing, and that bearing will create a lot of metal. And that metal, the shift fork that rides down here. You see, in the oil, there is a shaft that then has a shift fork right here. And the case, you can see at the bottom of the case here, this is the oil level. And if we go over here, this is where that detent is, and this is where the pressure or the position sensor is right here. So when this all gets covered in metal, it can no longer see what position that shift fork is in, and therefore it doesn't know if it's actually in reverse or not. That's the reverse gear, the lower gear. So a good way to check for this is you can just take the drain plug off, and there's a magnet there, and if it's covered in metal, in fuzzy metal, not like big shards, but just like, you know, covered in little grains of like fine metal, then you've got a bearing that's grenading, most likely. And if it happened after a rebuild, most likely someone took that nut off and then did not put it on properly. Or there's other nuts. You see, there's a bearing here and a bearing here and another bearing on the face, which is right here. Okay, so those bearings are not angular contact bearings, but they do have two races that meet in the middle. So there's technically no preload requirement for that. You can just apply enough torque so that the nut doesn't move, which again is, it varies. It's between the 40 and 60 Newton meters mark that I get to take it off from that closed position. Now, how am I getting that? I'm not taking that negative torque from loosening it. What I do is I take it, I mark it, I take the nut off, I clean the nut in the shaft so you can spin it on by hand, and then I measure the torque that it takes to get those dots to align. And that's why it varies. I'm not exactly sure. There's no manual for this, but I do know that when you do it that way, it doesn't come back. It doesn't have a problem. So guys, just be really careful. Mark what you're doing, you know, and honestly, if you're a user of the car and you want to get it fixed, it's shockingly hard to find good shops. If you're in Florida, it just doesn't exist. If you're in Los Angeles, I don't think it exists really. Not for the PTUs. Okay, you can have your specialists that deal with air-cooled Porsches or whatever. They're going to charge you a premium, but when it comes to gearboxes, I'm finding that there are no specialists that are consistently doing things the right way. And is that a shocker? The dealer stopped letting technicians even service the transmissions 20 years ago. No brand allows a technician, a modern master tech, even if they're transmission master certified, to open a gearbox. It's you send it back to the manufacturer of the gearbox and have it rebuilt, and you sell a remanufactured unit to the client. So this is going to get really expensive. All cars are going to get very expensive to own, all performance cars. And someone said, you know, you should be training, you should be holding a school, but I've trained several guys and they still make, you would need to be doing this for a long time. Like, you would need to be doing this for 6 to 12 months before you can consistently crank out thoughtlessly, mindlessly, and that way you get used to what you're seeing so that when something's different, you stop and you say, whoa, something's different. Like for instance, this is a new problem that we've started to see. This bushing here, there's two of them. There's one right here that this axle shaft rides in, spinning in the case. This is pressed in the case. This should be nice and smooth. The shaft should spin in here with a lube flow coming from the shaft. You can see the oiling hole there. And this is coming from the factory. This is not due to a user error, but how do you fix that? It's more tricky than you think, especially if you just have one and you don't have the experience. And I've seen it on several. So there's a cause. So how do you not have that same cause? and we'll make another video about that. But anyway, I'm sorry for droning on. This is about the no reverse when you have a rebuild already performed. I'll show you some pictures of the magnet with the metal on it, and also messages from some of these people who've done it, just asking me, like, what's going on? I think a solenoid's bad. Do you sell the solenoids? It's like, no, it's not the solenoid for reverse. I just rebuilt it. It's all fine. It's not.